Buenas tardes. Señor presidente Barack Obama, nos complace recibirlo en la primera visita de un mandatario de los Estados Unidos a nuestro país después de 88 años. Constatamos que en los 15 meses transcurridos, desde que anunciamos la decisión de restablecer las relaciones diplomáticas, hemos obtenido resultados concretos. Reanudamos el correo postal directo y firmamos un acuerdo para restablecer los vuelos regulares. Hemos ampliado la cooperación en áreas de interés mutuo. Suscribimos 2 memorándums de entendimiento sobre protección de medio ambiente y áreas marinas y otro para mejorar la seguridad de la navegación marítima. Hoy se firmará uno más sobre cooperación en la agricultura. Actualmente se está negociando otro grupo de instrumentos bilaterales para cooperar en esferas como el enfrentamiento al narcotráfico, la seguridad del comercio y de los viajeros y la salud. Sobre esta última, hemos acordado profundizar la colaboración en la prevención y tratamiento de enfermedades transmisibles como el Zika y de enfermedades crónicas no transmisibles, incluyendo el cáncer. Esta cooperación es beneficiosa no solo para Cuba y los Estados Unidos, sino también para nuestro hemisferio. A partir de las decisiones adoptadas por el presidente Obama para modificar la aplicación de algunos aspectos del bloqueo, empresas cubanas y sus contrapartes estadounidenses trabajan en la identificación de posibles operaciones comerciales que se pudieran concretar en el marco aún restrictivo de las regulaciones en vigor. Algunas se han materializado especialmente en el área de las telecomunicaciones, ámbito en el que nuestro país cuenta con un programa basado en sus prioridades de desarrollo y en la necesaria soberanía tecnológica que garantiza el uso apropiado de estas al servicio de los intereses nacionales. También se avanza en negociaciones para la adquisición de medicamentos, equipos médicos y equipamiento para generación de energía y protección del medio ambiente, entre otras. Mucho más pudiera hacerse si se levantara el bloqueo de los Estados Unidos. Reconocemos la posición del presidente Obama y de su gobierno contra el bloqueo y los reiterados llamados que ha hecho al Congreso para que lo elimine. Las últimas medidas adoptadas por su gobierno son positivas, pero no suficientes. Intercambié con el presidente sobre otras medidas que pensamos pueden tomarse para eliminar restricciones aún vigentes y hacer una importante contribución al desmantelamiento del bloqueo. Esto es esencial porque el bloqueo continúa en vigor y tiene componentes disuasivos y efectos intimidatorios de alcance extraterritorial, sobre lo cual le puse algunos ejemplos al presidente para mostrarle sus consecuencias negativas para Cuba y otros estados. El bloqueo es el obstáculo más importante para nuestro desarrollo económico y el bienestar del pueblo cubano. Por eso, su eliminación será esencial para normalizar las relaciones bilaterales. También será beneficioso para la emigración cubana, que desea lo mejor para sus familias y su país. Para avanzar hacia la normalización, también será necesario que se devuelva el territorio ilegalmente ocupado por la base naval de Guantánamo. Ambos temas, por ser los principales obstáculos, fueron abordados una vez más en el editorial publicado el 9 de marzo pasado en el órgano oficial del Partido Comunista de Cuba, y hace solo 4 días en la conferencia de prensa de nuestro canciller Bruno Rodríguez Parrilla, ampliamente divulgado por la prensa. Asimismo, otras políticas debieran ser suprimidas para que pueda haber relaciones normales entre Cuba y los Estados Unidos. No debiera pretenderse para ello que el pueblo cubano renuncie al destino que libre y soberanamente ha escogido y por el que ha hecho inmensos sacrificios. Intercambiamos además sobre temas internacionales, en particular aquellos que pudieran afectar la paz y la estabilidad regional. Especialmente estaba previsto y no hubo tiempo para concluirlo, era abordar nuestra preocupación por la situación de desestabilización que se intenta fomentar en Venezuela, lo cual es contraproducente para el ambiente en el continente, pero lo expreso en esta ocasión. Igualmente, dialogamos sobre la marcha del proceso de paz en Colombia y los esfuerzos para poner fin a este conflicto. Existen profundas diferencias entre nuestros países que no van a desaparecer, pues tenemos concepciones distintas sobre muchos temas, como los modelos políticos, la democracia, el ejercicio de los derechos humanos, la justicia social, las relaciones internacionales, la paz y la estabilidad mundial. Defendemos los derechos humanos. Consideramos que los derechos civiles, políticos, económicos, sociales y culturales son indivisibles, interdependientes y universales. No concebimos que un gobierno no defienda y garantice el derecho a la salud, la educación, la seguridad social, a la alimentación y al desarrollo, el salario igual por trabajo igual y los derechos de los niños. Nos oponemos a la manipulación política y el doble rasero sobre los derechos humanos. Cuba tiene mucho que decir y que mostrar en esta materia y por ello le reiteré al presidente nuestra disposición a mantener el diálogo que iniciamos. El pasado 17 de diciembre del 2014, cuando anunciamos la decisión de restablecer las relaciones diplomáticas, expresé: debemos aprender el arte de convivir de forma civilizada con nuestras diferencias. El 15 de julio del 2015, ante nuestro Parlamento, señalé: cambiar todo lo que deba ser cambiado es asunto soberano y exclusivo de los cubanos. El gobierno revolucionario tiene la disposición de avanzar en la normalización de las relaciones, convencido de que ambos países podemos cooperar y coexistir civilizadamente en beneficio mutuo, por encima de las diferencias que tenemos y seguramente tendremos, y contribuir con ello a la paz, la seguridad, la estabilidad, el desarrollo y la equidad en nuestro continente y el mundo. Hoy ratifico que debemos poner en práctica el arte de la convivencia civilizada, que implica aceptar y respetar las diferencias y no hacer de ellas el centro de nuestra relación, sino promover vínculos que privilegien el beneficio de ambos países y pueblos y concentrarnos en lo que nos acerca y no en lo que nos separa. Coincidimos en que nos queda por delante un largo y complejo camino por recorrer, pero lo importante es que hemos comenzado a dar pasos para construir una relación de nuevo tipo, como la que nunca ha existido entre Cuba y los Estados Unidos. Destruir un puente es fácil y requiere poco tiempo. Reconstruirlo sólidamente es una tarea de mucho más y larga, es mucho más larga y difícil. Después de 4 intentos fallidos, en una muestra de voluntad y perseverancia, el 2 de septiembre del 2013, la nadadora estadounidense Diana Nayat logró cruzar a nado el estrecho de la Florida sin jaula ante tiburones. Para esa hazaña de vencer la distancia que separa geográficamente a nuestros países, o por esa hazaña, el 30 de agosto del 2014, bajo los acordes de los signos nacionales de Cuba y los Estados Unidos, fue condecorada con la Orden al Mérito Deportivo otorgado por el Consejo de Estado cubano. Esta proeza contiene un fuerte mensaje. Debería servirnos de ejemplo para las relaciones bilaterales, ya que confirma que si ella pudo, entonces nosotros también podremos. Le reitero al presidente Obama nuestro agradecimiento por su visita y la voluntad del gobierno de Cuba de seguir avanzando en los próximos meses por el bien de nuestros pueblos y países. Muchas gracias.
Buenas tardes, President Castro, to you, the Cuban government, and the Cuban people. Thank you for the welcome that you've extended to me, to my family, and to my delegation. For more than half a century, the sight of a U.S. president here in Havana would have been unimaginable. But this is a new day. Es un nuevo día between our two countries. With your indulgence, Mr. President, I want to go just briefly off topic because during this weekend I received news that one of our outstanding United States Armed Service members, Marine Staff Sergeant Louis F. Cardin of Temecula, California, was killed in northern Iraq as we assisted the Iraqi government in dealing with ISIL, the terrorist organization there. And I just wanted to give my thoughts and prayers to the family there and those who've been injured. It's a reminder that even as we embark on this historic visit, there are U.S. armed service members who are sacrificing each and every day on behalf of our freedom and our safety. So I'm grateful to them. And my wife Michelle and I have brought our daughters. And by the way, they don't always want to go with us. They're teenagers now. They have friends at home and they have things to do, but they wanted to come to Cuba because they understood and we wanted to show them the beauty of Cuba and its people. We were moved by the Cubans who received us yesterday, smiling and waving as we drove in from the airport. We were grateful for the opportunity to experience Old Havana and some excellent Cuban food. Our visit to the cathedral was a reminder of the values that we share, the deep faith that sustains so many Cubans and Americans, and it also gave me an opportunity to express my gratitude to Cardinal Ortega, who, along with His Holiness Pope Francis, did so much to support the improved relations between our governments. This morning I was honored to pay tribute to José Martí, not only his role in Cuban independence, but the profound words that he wrote and spoke in support of liberty and freedom everywhere. I bring with me the greetings and the friendship of the American people. In fact, I'm joined on this trip by nearly 40 members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans. This is the largest such delegation of my presidency, and it indicates the excitement and interest in America about the process that we've undertaken. These members of Congress recognize that our new relationship with the Cuban people is in the interest of both nations. I'm also joined by some of America's top business leaders and entrepreneurs because we're ready to pursue more commercial ties which create jobs and opportunity for Cubans and Americans alike. And I'm especially pleased that I'm joined on this trip by so many Cuban Americans. For them and for the more than 2 million proud Cuban Americans across the United States, this is a moment filled with great emotion. Ever since we made it easier to travel between our countries, more Cuban Americans are coming home. And for many, this is a time of new hope for the future. So, President Castro, I want to thank you for the courtesy and the spirit of openness that you've shown during our talks. At our meeting in Panama last year, you said that we're willing to discuss every issue and everything's on the table. So with your understanding, my statement will be a little longer than usual. President Castro always jokes with me about how long Castro brother speeches can be, but I'm going to actually go a little longer than you probably today, with your indulgence. We have a half a century of work to catch up on. Our growing engagement with Cuba is guided by one overarching goal: advancing the mutual interests of our two countries, including improving the lives of our people, both Cubans and Americans. That's why I'm here. I've said consistently, after more than 5 very difficult decades, the relationship between our governments will not be transformed overnight. We continue, as President Castro indicated, to have some very serious differences, including on democracy and human rights. And President Castro and I have had very frank and candid conversations on these subjects. The United States recognizes progress that Cuba has made as a nation, its enormous achievements in education and in healthcare. And perhaps most importantly, I affirm that Cuba's destiny will not be decided by the United States or any other nation. Cuba is sovereign and rightly has great pride, and the future of Cuba will be decided by Cubans, not by anybody else. At the same time, as we do wherever we go around the world, I made it clear that the United States will continue to speak up on behalf of democracy, including the right of the Cuban people to decide their own future. We'll speak out on behalf of universal human rights, including freedom of speech and assembly and religion. Indeed, I look forward to meeting with and hearing from Cuban civil society leaders tomorrow. But as you heard, President Castro has also addressed what he views as shortcomings in the United States around basic needs for people and poverty and inequality and race relations. And we welcome that constructive dialogue as well, because we believe that when we share our deepest beliefs and ideas with an attitude of mutual respect, that we can both learn and make the lives of our people better. Now, part of normalizing relations means that we discuss these differences directly. So I'm very pleased that we've agreed to hold our next U.S.-Cuba human rights dialogue here in Havana this year. And both of our countries will welcome visits by independent United Nations experts as we combat human trafficking, which we agree is a profound violation of human rights. Even as we discuss these differences, we share a belief that we can continue to make progress in those areas that we have in common. President Castro, you said in Panama that we might disagree on something today on which we would agree tomorrow. And that's certainly been the case over the past 15 months and the days leading up to this visit. And today I can report that we continue to move forward on many fronts when it comes to normalizing relations. We're moving ahead with more opportunities for Americans to travel to Cuba and interact with the Cuban people. Over the past year, the number of Americans coming here has surged. Last week, we gave approval for individual Americans to come here for educational travel. U.S. airlines will begin direct commercial flights this year. With last week's port security announcement, we've removed the last major hurdle to resuming cruises and ferry service, all of which will mean even more Americans visiting Cuba in the years ahead and appreciating the incredible history and culture of the Cuban people. We're moving ahead with more trade. With only 90 miles between us, we're natural trading partners. Other steps we took last week, allowing the U.S. dollar to be used more widely with Cuba, giving Cubans more access to the dollar in international transactions, and allowing Cubans in the U.S. to earn salaries. These things will do more to create opportunities for trade and joint ventures. We welcome Cuba's important announcement that it plans to end the 10% penalty on dollar conversions here, which will open the door to more travel and more commerce. And these steps show that we're opening up to one another. With this visit, we've agreed to deepen our cooperation on agriculture to support our farmers and our ranchers. This afternoon, I'll highlight some of the new commercial deals being announced by major U.S. companies. And just as I continue to call on Congress to lift the trade embargo, I discussed with President Castro the steps we urge Cuba to take to show that it's ready to do more business, which includes allowing more joint ventures and allowing foreign companies to hire Cubans directly. We're moving ahead with our efforts to help connect more Cubans to the internet and the global economy. Under President Castro, Cuba's set a goal of bringing Cubans online, and we want to help. At this afternoon's entrepreneurship event, I'll discuss additional steps we're taking to help more Cubans learn, innovate, and do business online, because in the 21st century, countries cannot be successful unless their citizens have access to the internet. We're moving ahead with more educational exchanges. Thanks to the generous support of the Cuban American community, I can announce that my 100,000 Strong in the Americas initiative will offer new opportunities for university students to study abroad, more Americans at Cuban schools and more Cubans at U.S. schools. And going forward, educational grants and scholarships will be available to Cuban students. And in partnership with the Cuban government, we'll offer more English language training for Cuban teachers, both in Cuba and online. Even as Cubans prepare for the arrival of the Rolling Stones, we're moving ahead with more events and exchanges that bring Cubans and Americans together as well. We all look forward to tomorrow's matchup between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cuban national team. More broadly, we're moving ahead with partnerships in health, science, and the environment. Just as Cubans and American medical teams have worked together in Haiti against cholera and in West Africa against Ebola, and I want to give a special commendation to Cuban doctors who volunteered and took on some very tough assignments to save lives in West Africa in partnership with us and other nations. We very much appreciate the work that they did. Our medical professionals will now collaborate in new areas, preventing the spread of viruses like Zika and leading new research into cancer vaccines. Our governments will also work together to protect the beautiful waters of this region that we share. And as two countries threatened by climate change, I believe we can work together to protect communities and our low-lying coasts. And we're inviting Cuba to join us and our Caribbean and Central American partners at this spring's Regional Energy Summit in Washington. And finally, we're moving ahead with our closer cooperation on regional security. We're working to deepen our law enforcement coordination, especially against narco-traffickers that threaten both of our peoples. I want to thank President Castro and the Cuban government for hosting peace talks between the Colombian government and the FARC, and we remain optimistic that Colombians can achieve a lasting and just peace. And although we did not have an extensive discussion of Venezuela, we did touch on the subject, and I believe that the whole region has an interest in a country that is addressing its economic challenges, is responsive to the aspirations of its people, and is a source of stability in the region. That is, I believe, an interest that we should all share. So again, President Castro, I want to thank you for welcoming me. I think it's fair to say that the United States and Cuba are now engaged across more areas than any time during my lifetime. And with every passing day, more Americans are coming to Cuba, more U.S. businesses and schools and faith groups are working to forge new partnerships with the Cuban people. More Cubans are benefiting from the opportunities that this travel and trade bring. As you indicated, the road ahead will not be easy. Fortunately, we don't have to swim with sharks in order to achieve the goals that you and I have set forth. As you say here in Cuba, echar para delante. Despite the difficulties, we will continue to move forward. We're focused on the future, and I'm absolutely confident that if we stay on this course, we can deliver a better and brighter future for both the Cuban people and the American people. So, muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Pasamos ahora a una breve sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Ruego a los periodistas identificarse y hacer uso de los micrófonos ubicados en la sala. Una primera pregunta del presidente Barack Obama. Sí.
First question, Jim Costa.
Gracias, President Castro, para su hospitalidad en La Habana. And thank you, Mr. President. In your meeting with President Castro, what words did you use to urge him to pursue democratic reforms and expand human rights here in Cuba? Will you invite President Castro to the White House? We know he's been to New York. And why did you not meet with Fidel Castro? And President Castro, mi padre es cubano. Él se fue para los Estados Unidos cuando era joven. My father's Cuban. He left for the United States when he was young. Ve una dirección nueva y democrática para su país. Do you see a new and democratic direction for your country? Y, por favor, señor, ¿por qué tiene prisioneros políticos cubanos? Why do you have Cuban political prisoners? ¿Y por qué no los suelta? Y, por favor, una pregunta más. ¿A quién prefiere? Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? Gracias.
As I think we both indicated, we had a very frank conversation around issues of democracy and human rights. Our starting point is that we have two different systems of government, two different economies, and we have decades of profound differences, both bilaterally and internationally. What I have said to President Castro is that we are moving forward and not looking backwards, that we don't view Cuba as a threat to the United States. I hope that my visit here indicates the degree to which we're setting a new chapter in Cuban-American relations. But as is true with countries around the world where we have normalized relations, we will continue to stand up for basic principles that we believe in. America believes in democracy. We believe that freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and freedom of religion are not just American values, but are universal values. They may not express themselves exactly in the same way in every country. They may not be enshrined in the founding documents or constitutions of every country the same way or protected legally in exactly the same ways, but the impulse, the human impulse towards freedom, the freedom that Jose Marti talked about, we think is a universal longing. President Castro, I think, has pointed out that in his view, making sure that everybody's getting a decent education or health care, has basic security in old age, that those things are human rights as well. I personally would not disagree with that. But it doesn't detract from some of these other concerns. And the goal of the human rights dialogue is not for the United States to dictate to Cuba how they should govern themselves, but to make sure that we are having a frank and candid conversation around this issue, and hopefully that we can learn from each other. It does not mean that it has to be the only issue we talk about. Economics, health, scientific exchanges, international cooperation on issues of regional as well as global import are also important. But this is something that we are going to stay on. And I actually welcome President Castro commenting on some of the areas where he feels that we're falling short, because I think we should not be immune or afraid of criticism or discussion as well. Here's the one thing I do know, is that when I talk to Cuban Americans, and Jim, you're second generation, and so I think I speak not for you directly, but for many that I talk to around the United States. I think there's enormous hope that there can be reconciliation, and the bridge that President Castro discussed can be built between the Cuban American community and Cubans here. There are family ties and cultural ties that are so strong, and I think everyone would benefit from those ties being reestablished. One of the impediments to strengthening those ties is these disagreements around human rights and democracy. And to the extent that we can have a good conversation about that and to actually make progress, that I think will allow us to see the full flowering of a relationship that is possible. In the absence of that, I think it will continue to be a very powerful irritant. And this is not unique to U.S.-Cuban relations. It's one that, as you know, I have conversations with when we go to bilateral meetings with some of our very close allies, as well as countries that we don't have as close of a relationship to. But I think it is something that, that matters. And I've met with people who've been subject to arbitrary detention, and That's something that I generally have to speak out on because I hear from them directly and I know what it means for them. Go ahead. Excuse me.
¿Ya?
Yeah, what?
Estaba preguntando si se dirigió a mí porque las primeras palabras no la entendí. Me pareció oír que habló de presos humanos.
No, I think the second one was addressed to you.
Ah, presos.
And Trump and Hillary.
¿A quién?
I
¿A
can't
él
comment
o a
on
mí?
Para él, para su, señor presidente Castro.
¿Qué dijo de los presos políticos? ¿Qué pregunta concreta hizo de los presos políticos?
Sí, sí.
Si hay presos políticos. Preguntó si hay presos
¿Por qué
políticos.
su país tiene prisioneros políticos cubanos?
Está bien,
¿Y
es la
por
única
qué
que
no
te
lo
voy a
suelta?
permitir. Dame la lista ahora mismo de los presos políticos para soltarlo. Menciónala ahora. ¿Qué preso político? Dime el nombre o los nombres. O cuando concluya la reunión me da una lista con los presos. Y si hay esos presos políticos, antes de que llegue la noche van a estar sueltos. Ya.
Una
Otra pregunta.
pregunta.
¿Y Donald
Una-
Trump o Hillary Clinton, presidente Castro?
Una pregunta al presidente Raúl. Boris.
Saludos para el presidente Obama y para el
Yo
presidente.
todavía no puedo votar en los Estados Unidos. ¿Cómo?
Una pregunta para el presidente Raúl Castro, Boris Fuentes, de la televisión cubana. Presidente Raúl Castro, usted ha dicho en reiteradas ocasiones, y hoy lo ha repetido una vez más aquí, debemos aprender a convivir civilizadamente con nuestras diferencias. ¿Podría usted ampliarnos ese concepto en este momento histórico que está viviendo Cuba? Y también, de paso, una pregunta pequeña para el presidente Barack Obama. Presidente Obama, ¿podría el gobierno de Estados Unidos dar mayores pasos para eliminar el bloqueo de Estados Unidos durante su gobierno y no tendría que vivir una generación más de cubanos bajo este bloqueo económico y financiero contra Cuba?
Para mí fue la primera. O sea, repite tu pregunta que no pudo ir bien. Pues.
Usted ha dicho en reiteradas ocasiones, hoy lo ha repetido otra vez, debemos aprender a convivir civilizadamente con nuestras diferencias.
Bien, el propio presidente Obama se ha estado refiriéndose a eso. Hemos dado los primeros pasos, bastante para ser los primeros, y debemos continuar dando esos pasos. Y estoy seguro de que lograremos convivir pacíficamente en un ambiente de colaboración mutua, como ya lo estamos haciendo en algunos aspectos, en beneficio de ambos países, en beneficio de otros países, como ya lo hemos hecho modestamente en Haití, cuando el cólera, y en África con el ébola, como él se refirió. Y que es el futuro de la humanidad si queremos salvar la especie, aunque el agua siga creciendo y la isla se reduzca. Sí. Muchas preguntas para mí. Yo creo que las preguntas hay que hacerse al presidente Obama.
Presidente Obama, por favor.
Ahí está el
Yeah,
regulador.
I've got one more. So we have administratively already made a number of modifications on the embargo. I referred to a number of them in my opening statement. And we've actually been fairly aggressive in exercising as much flexibility as we can, given that the law putting the embargo in place has not been repealed by Congress. There may be some technical aspects of the embargo that we can still make adjustments on depending on problems as they arise. So, for example, the issue around the dollar and the need to make modifications in terms of how the embargo was implemented to encourage rather than discourage reforms that the Cuban government itself is willing to engage in and to facilitate greater trade and commerce. That is something that grew out of the dialogue between our governments, and we have made appropriate adjustments to it. It will take some time for commercial banks to understand the new rules, but we actually think that this is an area where we can improve current circumstances. But I'll be honest with you that the list of things that we can do administratively is growing shorter, and the bulk of changes that have to be made with respect to the embargo are now going to rely on Congress making changes. I've been very clear about the interest in getting that done before I leave. Frankly, Congress is not as productive as I would like during presidential election years. But the fact that we have such a large congressional delegation with Democrats and Republicans with us is an indication that there is growing interest inside of Congress for lifting the embargo. As I just indicated in my earlier answer, how quickly that happens will in part depend on whether we can bridge some of our differences around human rights issues, and that's why the dialogue, I think, is so important. It sends a signal that at least there's engagement between the two countries on these matters. Okay. Now, I promised the President I would take one more question. Andrea Mitchell of NBC. Andrea, if you can get the mic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you feel after your meetings today that you have made enough progress to even accelerate the pace, and that the Cuban government is able to move quickly enough so that the changes that you have made through these technical adjustments to the embargo will be permanent, cannot be reversed by the next president? And what advice have you given to President Castro about the ability of having the blockade, the embargo lifted? Because he has said again today, this is a continuous issue which is blocking progress from their standpoint. And you said the conversations about human rights were frank and candid, and that you want to move forward. But even as you were arriving, there were dramatic arrests of peaceful protests, the ladies in white. What signal does that send? Can you have civilized coexistence at the same time you have such profound disagreements about the very definitions of what human rights means, as President Castro expressed today? And for President Castro, for many of us, it's remarkable to hear you speak about all of these subjects. Could you tell us what you see in the future? President Obama has 9 months remaining. You have said you would be stepping down in 2018. What is the future of our two countries, given the different definitions and the different interpretations of profound issues like democracy and human rights? Thank you.
Well, Andrea, the embargo is going to end. When? I can't be entirely sure, but I believe it will end, and the path that we're on will continue beyond my administration. The reason is logic. The reason is that what we did for 50 years did not serve our interests or the interests of the Cuban people. And as I said when we made the announcement about normalization of relations, if you keep on doing something over and over again for 50 years and it doesn't work, it might make sense to try something new. And that's what we've done. And the fact that there has been strong support, not just inside of Congress, not just among the American people, but also among the Cuban people, indicates that this is a process that should and will continue. Having said that, lifting the embargo requires the votes of a majority in Congress and maybe even more than a majority in the Senate. And as I indicated to President Castro, two things I think will help accelerate the pace of bringing the embargo to an end. The first is, to the degree that we can take advantage of the existing changes that we've already made and we see progress, that will help to validate this change in policy. So, for example, we have said that it is no longer a restriction on U.S. companies to invest in helping to build internet and broadband infrastructure inside of Cuba. It is not against U.S. law, as it's been interpreted by the administration. If we start seeing those kinds of commercial deals taking place, and Cubans are benefiting from greater access to the internet, and when I go to the entrepreneurship meeting later this afternoon, I understand that we're going to meet some young Cubans who are already getting trained and are facile and using the internet and interested in startups. That builds a constituency for ending the embargo. If we build on the work that we're doing in agriculture, and you start seeing more U.S. farmers interacting with Cuban farmers, and there's more exports and imports, that builds a constituency, and the possibility of ending the embargo increases. So hopefully taking advantage of what we've already done will help. And the second area, which we've already discussed extensively, is the issue of human rights. People are still concerned about that inside of Cuba. Now, keep in mind, I've got fierce disagreements with the Chinese around human rights. I'll be going to Vietnam later this year. I have deep disagreements with them as well. You know, when we first visited Burma, people questioned whether we should be traveling there because of long-standing human rights violations in our view. And the approach that I've taken has been that if I engage, frankly, clearly, stating what our beliefs are, but also being clear that we can't force change on any particular country. Ultimately, it has to come from within. Then that is going to be a more useful strategy than the same kinds of rigid disengagement that for 50 years did nothing. I guess ultimately what this comes down to, Andres, I have faith in people. I think that if you meet Cubans here and Cubans meet Americans and they're meeting and talking and interacting and doing business together and going to school together and learning from each other, then they'll recognize people are people. And in that context, I believe that change will occur.
President Castro.
Okay, now I'm done, but Senor Presidente, I think Andrea had a question for you just about your vision. It's up to you. He did say he was only going to take one question. I was going to take two, but I leave it up to you if you want to address that question.
Por favor.
Andrea's, she's one of our most esteemed journalists in America, and I'm sure she'd appreciate just a short, brief answer.
Andrea.
Mr. President.
Sí, cómo no. El otro día le hizo una pregunta al canciller nuestro. Andrea. Le están preguntando a usted, pero tenemos que concluir. Hay un programa Yo sé que si me quedo aquí hacen 500 preguntas. Yo dije que iba a contestar una, voy a contestar 1.5. Ya el presidente Obama me ayudó con la respuesta. Andrea, es usted. Bien, Andrea. Yo leí algo aquí de lo que pienso de los derechos humanos, pero ahora soy yo el que le voy a hacer una pregunta a usted. En las instituciones ya reconocidas hay 40 y cuánto, 40 de 61 sí. Instrumentos internacionales, etcétera. ¿Cuántos países, Andrea, del mundo cumplen los 61 derechos humanos? Eso es señalado ahí. Y civiles, en su conjunto. ¿Qué país los cumple todos? ¿Lo sabe usted? Yo sí. Ninguno. Unos cumplen unos, otros cumplen otros. Y entre esos estamos nosotros. De esos mencionados 61 son. Cuba cumple 47. Habrá otros que cumplan más y muchos que cumplen menos. No se puede politizar el tema de los derechos humanos. Eso no es correcto. Si se persigue con esos fines, vamos a seguir con lo mismo. Por ejemplo, para Cuba, que no los cumple todos, el derecho a la salud. ¿Usted quiere un derecho más sagrado que el derecho a la salud? Que no se mueran millones y millones de niños por falta de una simple vacuna, por cualquier medicina. Por ejemplo, ¿usted está de acuerdo con el derecho a la enseñanza gratuita para todos los nacidos en cualquier país? Creo que hay muchos países que no consideran eso un derecho humano. En Cuba, empezando que todos los niños nacen en hospital y ese mismo primer día son inscritos. Porque cuando las madres están en un estado avanzado de su embarazo, se les conduce a los hospitales muchos días antes, o en algunas casas o locales adjuntos, muchos días antes del parto, para que todos nazcan en hospitales, no importa en qué hilada montaña viva, ni sus condiciones económicas. Tenemos también otros muchos derechos. Derecho a la salud, derecho a la enseñanza. Usted considera, por ejemplo, el último ejemplo que le voy a sacar, o le voy a exponer. ¿Usted cree que por un trabajo igual un hombre gane más que una mujer solo por ser mujer? Bueno, pues en Cuba la mujer gana igual que el hombre si hace igual trabajo. Le puedo enumerar decenas y cientos. Es decir, que no se puede estar utilizando ese argumento, pienso yo, en la confrontación política, que no es justo, no es correcto. No quiero decir que no es honesto, eso forma parte de las confrontaciones. Vamos a trabajar para que todos podamos cumplir todos los derechos humanos. Eso es así. Igual que hablar de precios. Yo voy a terminar porque fue un compromiso de terminar puntual. No es correcto por preguntarnos por presos políticos. Dígame el nombre del preso político. Y ya.
Hemos concluido. Muchas gracias a todos por la participación.
Hello, Milwaukee. Oh, it's good to be back in the Midwest. How's everybody doing today? You look great. And it's a balmy 25 degrees. The last time I was here was for, I'm sorry, what? Oh, you were just saying my name. Okay, I thought somebody got sick or something. And if you have a seat, go ahead and sit down. I'm going to be here for a while. The last time I was here was for Labor Fest a couple years back. Next time I think I should come for Summerfest. I hear it's pretty fun. It's okay. There's some people I want to acknowledge who are here today. First of all, your outstanding mayor, Tom Barrett, is here. County Executive Chris Abele is here. Your Congresswoman Gretchen Moore is in the house. Thank you to everyone at the United Community Center for hosting us here today. And as a special treat, your own Milwaukee Bucks are in the house. These are some fine young men, and I told them that as long as they weren't playing the Bulls, I'd root for them. But I want to say how much I appreciate Brent for sharing his story. Please give him a big round of applause. You know, when I received his letter, it made a powerful impact for me because it was so honest about the fact that he wasn't a supporter of mine, which is okay. I just bought him lunch, and I think maybe, of course, I'm term limited, so there's not much I can do now to get a vote, but we hugged it out. But for him to be able to express not what only he's going through personally, but also reflect on what that means for the rest of the country and the rest of Wisconsin, you know, is extraordinary. We agree, Brent and I, that the Affordable Care Act is helping a whole lot of people like him. Brent is why we fought so hard to fix a broken health care system in the first place. It wasn't about Democrats or Republicans. It was about our values as Americans and making sure that hardworking Americans like Brent are no longer locked out of health insurance through no fault of their own. It was about the basic idea that in America, health care is not a privilege reserved for the few, but should be a right for all people. In the 6 years since I signed the Affordable Care Act into law, millions of people have bought affordable health insurance, and many of those bought it for the first time. Last summer, we learned that for the first time ever, America's uninsured rate has fallen below 10%. So this is the lowest rate of uninsured that we've seen since we started keeping these records. But we know that there are millions more who are eligible for coverage but haven't gotten it yet. And that's understandable. When you're going about your day-to-day life, going to work, taking care of your kids, you're not paying attention to enrollment deadlines. A lot of people still don't know that most consumers can get covered for less than $100 a month, less than your cell phone bill or your cable bill. And obviously there's been a lot of political noise surrounding the Affordable Care Act, so people haven't always known what's true and what's not. So here's what we did. We started a competition between 20 communities across America, from Philadelphia to Long Beach, from Atlanta to Denver, to see which city could get more of its uninsured neighbors to get covered. And I have to say that the folks who worked on this came up with some pretty clever ways to sign people up. In Seattle, folks held healthcare happy hours. Now that's a pretty good trick right there. In Nashville, they focused on music festivals. New Orleans created a challenge between barbershops and beauty salons. Oakland set up a healthcare storefront at City Hall for folks to visit and shop in. I'm pretty proud of my own hometown. Chicago outperformed every other competitor except one. Except one. Milwaukee came out on top. You get bragging rights this year. Bigger cities may have gotten more folks covered overall, but proportionally, relative to your size, you won out. All told, counting new folks and people renewing their coverage, you got nearly 90,000 people to sign up. That's enough to fill Lambeau Field, still have a big tailgating party with a lot of folks outside. And those tailgaters wouldn't have to worry because Obamacare covers indigestion from too many brats. They'd be covered. Okay. So this city should be proud. You did the best job of looking out for each other and taking care of each other. And I'm here to say congratulations. And what's remarkable is you did it by working together. Elected officials, hospitals, clinics, insurers, faith leaders, community leaders, businesses, nonprofits, everybody stepped up as a team. And you guys tried everything. Mayor Barrett was out there handing flyers out himself, stuck flyers to people's water bills, opened up libraries for enrollment events, set up a partnership with Uber to give folks a ride, covered buses and signs reminding people to sign up. Free clinics and health centers helped low-income residents enroll. Independent insurance agents even volunteered their time to help people choose the best option for them and their families. And some folks were skeptical that insurance was just too expensive. So healthcare navigators used a cost calculator to help people figure out the most affordable plans. You worked with TV stations to set up phone banks where viewers could call in and volunteers would help them sign up for coverage. It turns out they got a lot of calls from moms who wanted to sign up their young adult sons, which all of y'all, listen to your mom. She knows what's going on. And let's face it, men are just stupid sometimes. Don't go to a doctor, don't get checkups, you know. And because some minority communities were less likely to have signed up, the county worked with Black Healthcare Coalition to reach out to African Americans. They targeted the Hmong and Latino organizations with culturally appropriate materials, ran ads on Spanish language radio, made sure folks with disabilities had the information they needed to sign up. So the story to be told is one of just looking out for each other, just helping each other. This has been an incredible city and county-wide effort, not just in this competition, but for years. You've made Milwaukee a model for the nation. And you're proof that the Affordable Care Act works. Here's another piece of proof. Today I can announce that thanks to the law, 20 million more Americans now know the security of health insurance. 20 million. 20 million people. 20 million folks like Brent. That includes 6 million young people who were less likely to be insured before the Affordable Care Act. As many as 129 million Americans with pre-existing conditions can no longer be charged more or denied coverage just because they've been sick. Almost 140 million Americans who already have private insurance, so they didn't need to sign up for Obamacare, they're now guaranteed free preventive care as well, and checkups, mammograms. You're getting more for what you're paying for. So your insurance is better than it was. Even if you don't know it. Even if you didn't vote for me. Thanks, Obama. That's okay. You got an upgrade. And contrary to claims that this law would be a job killer, since I signed it, we've seen steady economic recovery. Our businesses have created jobs every single month, starting the month I signed the ACA into law. Every month. 71 straight months, 14 million new jobs, unemployment cut from 10% to 4.9%. Every month. And because this law fills the gaps in employer-based care, we know that when we change jobs or we lose a job or we go back to school or start that new business, we can still get coverage. The point was not to replace the coverage that people had if they had a great job and they had great benefits. The idea was things happen. You lose a job, you're going to find another one, but in the meantime, you don't want to lose your house. Somebody in your family gets sick unexpectedly. You want to make sure that they're getting the best of care. That's what insurance is. And the Affordable Care Act is saving lives, not just for folks like Brett, but also because the law is encouraging hospitals to focus on quality of care. These are the kinds of things that, I don't know, they don't make headlines, but since we signed this law, we've seen a big drop in folks getting infections at hospital and other improvements in hospital care. That leads to some 87,000 fewer deaths and $20 billion in cost savings. And the Affordable Care Act is saving money. Most folks shopping in the new marketplace have discovered that they can buy a plan for less than $75 a month. Last year, 90,000 Wisconsin seniors on Medicare saved an average of more than $1,000 on their prescription drugs, thanks to the Affordable Care Act. And we've been moving Medicare toward a payment model that rewards quality of care over quantity of care. And that means we want doctors and hospitals to focus on giving folks the right tests and the right treatment, not just trying to sell more tests and sell more treatments. And that delivers better outcomes. We've just learned we've already hit our initial goal of getting 30% of Medicare payments into this new model that's better for patients. So, the Affordable Care Act, AKA Obamacare. It's saving lives and it's saving money. And we've done all this while creating millions of new jobs. We've cut our deficits by almost 75%. The act itself has cost less than the original projections. And meantime, healthcare price inflation is at its lowest level in 50 years. So even if you aren't covered by Obamacare, your premiums or your employer's premiums or your share of premiums have increased at a slower rate over these last 3 years than they had in the previous 50, which doesn't mean that you're not still seeing some increases, and you may not be happy about that, but understand that we've actually significantly reduced the pace at which it was going up. And look, you wouldn't know any of this if you listened to the politicians on the other side out there about this, who are obsessed with repealing this law. To them, the facts I just mentioned don't matter, because this is an issue of ideology. This has to do with we're just against it. Facts, evidence don't comport with their conviction that the ACA means an end to the American way. And repeal has been a rallying cry. And they say they want to replace, but they still haven't come up with a replacement. Partly because we designed this plan with the help of a bunch of Republican thinkers including the then governor of Massachusetts, this is the plan that they signed into law there. Congressional Republicans have tried and failed to repeal or undermine it about 60 times. They've told you what they'd replace it with about 0 times. They sure won't tell you what would happen if they actually did repeal it. If they got their way, 20 million people will have their insurance taken away from them. 20 million people. And by the way, Milwaukee, while you worked your tails off to cover enough folks to fill Lambeau Field, your governor still refuses to expand Medicaid in this state. And we could cover another 21,000 Wisconsinites with a stroke of his pen. He could join 31 other governors who are taking this option, which, by the way, actually would save money. He's denying Wisconsinites their ticket to health insurance, and it's political. Your senior senator won't tell you that if he gets his way and it repeals Obamacare, millions of working families would see their insurance premiums spike. The leader of the Republicans in Congress, who lives just south of here, won't tell you that if he got his way and repeals Obamacare, millions of women would go back to paying higher premiums just because they're women. Millions of seniors would see the price of their prescription drugs shoot up. Now they'll tell you, no, those are the good parts, we'd keep those. Well, if you add it all up, that's the Affordable Care Act. Why are you trying to repeal it? What is it exactly that you're trying to repeal? No, this is an important point. See, people don't know that, for example, kids being covered until they're 26, or making sure that you can't be discriminated against because of a pre-existing condition, or making sure that women aren't being discriminated against when it comes to health insurance, or free preventive care, or seniors getting reduced prices on the prescription drugs. They don't know necessarily that those things are part of this law. So when you ask Republicans about these things, they'll say, well, yeah, those are okay. We just want to repeal the other parts. As I said, when you add it up, that's the law. Why do you want to repeal it? We can't let that happen. It has been 6 years since I signed the Affordable Care Act into law. This is no longer just about a law. It's not about me. It's not about politics. This is about the reality that somebody like Brett goes through. I get letters every day, and people describe to me what it meant for them to have health care coverage. Now, if you're healthy at the moment, you may not think about it. But at some point, each of us goes through times where things don't work out that great. And you got to have a backup plan. Once you get out of Washington, most Americans support the reality that they don't want people not having coverage. The vast majority of folks like their coverage. The vast majority of folks are satisfied with their choices of doctors and hospitals. People like what we've done. The people who are actually using it, not just the people who are hearing about it on Fox News. I'm talking about people who are actually using it. For all the years of political fighting, all the repeal votes, all the predictions of apocalypse, the reality is that real people are finally getting insurance and having a bridge to stay insured as they go through various changes in their lives. That's taking place in places like this, in Milwaukee. Real communities looking out for each other. Now, we are going to keep working to make health care work even better. There are things that I would love to work with the Republicans on in the closing months of my presidency to fine-tune this thing and identify ways that we can improve quality even more and reduce prices even more. We could certainly get more folks covered who are currently being left out. We've got to keep working to get governors and state legislators to expand Medicaid and take care of their citizens. We've got to keep working to make prescription drugs more affordable. But Milwaukee, you have proved that what Americans care about most is not scoring political points, it's looking after each other. You've made a difference in people's lives. We're not going backwards. We're not going to go back to a time where people could be denied because of pre-existing conditions. That's not who we are. That's who we were. That's not who we are now. Americans know that. Earlier today, I had lunch at the engine company with Brent and a few others who had written me letters. Yeah, I get 10 letters every night. I read them. Keeps me connected to the people I'm supposed to be serving on a day-to-day basis. And one of the people who wrote to me was a woman named Karen George. A few years ago, while Karen was finishing her law degree, her husband was laid off for the second time in 6 years. First time, they lost their health insurance. They had no choice but to get on what's called COBRA. But as you know, that's a really expensive transition plan. They could barely afford it. This time, they had the Affordable Care Act on their side. By dinner time, Karen had signed up her family for an affordable plan in the new health insurance marketplace, so she knew they were safe, they were protected, they were covered. And Karen said in her letter, she said, when something like a layoff happens, you face a collection of moments of panic. To have one of those moments of panic go away was something. Right then, our health care was there when we needed it. Soon after that came another moment of panic. Just 1 week after graduating law school, Karen experienced chest pains, ended up in the ER with what turned out to be a heart problem. Without this plan, she wrote, I probably would have tried to take a nap and wait for the pain to go away. But instead, Karen got the care she needed. And Karen's kids have their mom. That's because of your efforts. Because of you, America's moving closer to the day where every American family has that same peace of mind. So we got more work to do, but you've shown us that when ordinary citizens come together as one family and one community and roll up our sleeves and look out for one another, that's when change happens. That's when we're at our best. That's how we're going to keep building a country that lives up to its highest ideals. I could not be prouder of it. Congratulations. God bless you, Milwaukee. God bless these United States of America. Good luck, Milwaukee Bucks. Love you guys.